This is the
Stuck at
home service.
See if the Stuck at Home service is up yet. It's normally up by now. Go check. Hey, you know, what's happening with the Stuck at Home service?
Well, we only just made the last one. We've got ages. What is it, like Tuesday now?
Yeah, we're ahead of the last one. So
It's deep in pre-production.
I'm starting to be a bit more relaxed about this one, that's all.
Yeah. Like, how do you even open it?
With the new national anthem.
Was that by the national anthem by Kate Thomas?
That's the one, yeah. And Friends.
Remind me, how does that go?
It starts out like this.
We do not know what lies ahead, but our times they're coming. And if we believe all that's been said, it's a kind of unraveling. The ground beneath our feet is shaking, and with each day's news our hearts are aching. So put your hand in mine, my friend. We'll face what comes together. We'll face what comes together. So let us stand as we face the coming storm, for we love this land. Let's work for a better dawn, and let us love like we've never loved before. Sisters and brothers all together, let us stand.
That's it. That's the national anthem.
Yeah. Same every week, it's not a problem. It's not a
Yeah,
problem,
man, this show's really easy. Like, you barely need to think about it. Right?
Okay, then what are you doing for your first act?
I don't know if we haven't really thought about it yet. We've got so long until the show
I haven't
goes out.
ordered it. I mean, we're still at the stage of people, things coming in.
Oh, Robin, I think your phone's ringing.
Yeah, it's from Glenn. They got the virtual open mic for Sheffield.
Oh, yeah, we know Glenn. Him and this guy Ian both ran a little bit different open mics to get apart, and then now we're in the after times, or the during times. They've come together, and it's like a 24/7 open mic online.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it's
What
pretty cool.
sort of host videos of people and live performances?
Yeah. It goes on. It goes on all day and night. You know, we've got
It sounds
nearly like 4,000 entries.
I never take it in shifts. Do you want to hit the call?
Oh, I'll take his call, yeah. What's this guy called again?
Glenn.
Glenn? Yeah,
Glenn, how do you do?
Well, I've been a professional musician for about 25 years. On the corporate circuit, it's like all the black tie balls and all that kind of thing, you know, the big farmers' balls and sort of, big affairs. But I do the open mic nights. I've been doing them for at least 25 years, and I do them for a bit of fun, really, just because it's good to watch people come along and give it a go, you know, and sort of watch them grow and get better. It's just something that I've loved doing. It's just a Facebook group that we invited a few people. I mean, I know quite a lot of. I know loads of musicians. I've known lots of musicians all my life because my family's musical. So I know all the other musical families in Sheffield as well. You know, my dad sort of grew up together in bands with all the other young guys. So we've got quite a good network of known people. So when we started off, I thought, well, if I invite a few, I call them the Avengers. You know, if I invite a few sort of professionals and semi-professionals to post up, maybe it might encourage people and give them a bit of confidence. You know, and enjoy it. So I sent a circular message out to to my Avengers and said, look, will you just drop us a song on? and they have done. And it's fantastic. I love it. We're trying to stagger it really and do shift work, so to speak. So Ian's doing the daytimes up till sort of tea time, and I'm taking the night shifts and going straight through the night. It's quite easy for me, to be honest, because the body clock, musicians' body clock anyway. We get in at 3 a.m. and we're still wired, and we can't sleep and we need to unwind a bit and take a couple of hours. And so it really isn't much of a departure from myself. I'm awake most nights anyway, so it's lovely. And also the fact that people are still posting through the night and commenting as well, because a lot of them are on their own and they're just, they want to know. I mean, last night we had a first post from somebody last night, and it quite concerned me actually. It was a young fellow in a hospital bed, and he just sang a cappella on his own, and he said, "This is the first time I've posted, but I just wanted to reach out and see you were there, sort of thing." And he just had his third major operation, and he's on the mend, sort of thing, pulling through. But when you kind of, I could tell it would probably a bit lonely, a bit scared, maybe, and reaching out, So I caught him straight away as soon as he posted and commented back to him, and we had a good chat actually. And it was great. It was great because I think he probably thought nobody's going to be listening at this time of night, but it was lovely. He did a nice old Irish traditional song from his hospital bed, and that's not been unusual. That actually, people are posting from all over places, from all over Hong Kong and Canada. A young fella posted from Bogota about 4 days ago, I think, and he's in lockdown on his own, and they've told him 3 more months for him. I know, it's incredible. But I think it's the chatting to each other as well that's as important as the music, it seems, because a lot of people are lonely, and the thing that stood out for me is that the strangers from all over the world never met, who were talking to each other like they've known each other for 10 years, And the bottom rule with Fade is if it's a lockdown video, that's pretty much what the group's for. It's for anybody who's struggling, you know what I mean? So we've had to sort of be a bit strict about people posting pre-recorded videos from months ago. I'm a performer first, but I've always enjoyed taking a step back and watching somebody else take their first steps. It's wonderful that I really get a lot from that. Especially because over years I've been doing music nights. I have watched people that have come along and said, "I'm really scared. I don't know whether I can do it. And I'm terrified, And then they get up and they sing and they bring the house down, or they get the confidence up and they do it again. And within 6 or 7 months, they're out there doing it. And some of them have gone on to be professional. It's brilliant. It's just a great platform for anybody, that wants to just dip a toe.
And finally, Glenn, the big question for me. Hello? Oh, his signal's gone.
Has he dropped off? Oh.
He's pretty busy.
Oh, well, he's sounding like a nice enough fella.
Yeah, well, I think I'll definitely include him in the programme.
Sorry, I just got to ask for Frankie, what's up with your hair?
Oh, yes, I got a really nice haircut from Gabby.
That's going to be our next item. I've got some hilarious clips for it. Hey, listen to this one. Now there are small hairs floating around the backyard. Nobody seems to be panicking. It's all going quite well.
I think this back's looking okay. I think, as we've discussed before, it's this soon it's blend. I've now got to blend in. There's a blending in process that needs to happen from there to there now.
You sound very confident for a woman who just read the wiki how.
Fantastic radio as always.
Yeah, the problem is the haircut went rather well. And she did it very slowly. I mean, so.
And even if it hadn't, bad haircuts don't make for great audio experiences.
Yeah, you're right. We need to do something else.
Didn't you get an email from that Chris?
Yeah, I got an email from Chris Bellamy. He does the Sherlock Holmes stories and stuff like that.
Oh, Chris is reliable. Let's just slap it in the programme. It'll be fine.
Hi there. Ben Boardman here, resident board game geek on the Stuck at Home service. And this is Boardman's Board Game Boredom Buster. Some of you are probably already getting the shakes from not enough face-to-face board gaming. Online board gaming doesn't quite do it for you. You need the company of unwashed adolescents with bad breath, who might literally storm out of the room on the turn of a dice. Or, to be more accurate, a die. Yes, that's why I'm the resident geek. I can't offer you that, not yet anyway, but I can offer you something else, so stay tuned to Boardman's Board Game Boredom Buster. For several years now, I've been recording people in the public eye playing a board game while I commentate on it. No one's allowed to say anything. We message one another on a WhatsApp group. Today I'm going to play you a recording of a game of snakes and ladders between someone who needs no introduction, Boris Johnson, our glorious leader, and Caroline Lucas of the Green Party. We're using the John Lewis board. Johnson's got a blue counter, and Caroline's got, of course, a green one. So, if you want to follow the game at home, set it up now. They don't have to throw a 6 to start, but they get an extra turn whenever they do throw one. If they roll more than they need to reach the finish square at the end, they move to it, then back again. As ever, this week's Stuck at Home service is jam-packed with entertainment and instruction, so this feature will be in 2 parts. You can hear the second part next week. By the way, this game was played before the current social distancing guidelines, so Johnson and Caroline were sitting closer than 2 meters. Quite a lot closer as it happens. I was quite surprised. But I suppose if Michael Gove's Fizzog is all you've got to look at day in, day out, you'd welcome a change. And poor Caroline, well, she's got no one else in Parliament to snuggle up to. All the same, I was a bit taken aback. Anyway, here's the first part of Boris Johnson playing Caroline Lucas at Snakes and Ladders. Caroline has the first go, and she's thrown a 3, which takes her straight to a ladder and up to square 23. She's off to a flying start. Well, a fast train start. Not HS2, obviously. Just a regular cross-country train that hasn't been delayed nor cancelled. Perhaps a German train, or a Japanese one. So now it's Johnson's first go. And he's thrown a 5, which puts him on square 6 between 2 ladders. Bad luck, Boris. Oh, and there's a WhatsApp message from him. He's quick off the mark at some things, or so I'm told. Let's see what it says. It's all Greek to me and Caroline. Literally. He obviously doesn't realise they didn't teach us that at the schools we went to. And Caroline's replied, WTF do you mean? Puzzled face. Oh, he sent another message in English. It says, this reminds me of Aesop's fable of the tortoise and the hare. Still stuck in ancient Greece, aren't we, Boris? Caroline's go again. She's thrown a 5. That takes her to number 28. And there's a snake there. Down she goes to number 10. Oh, she sent a message. Green's at number 10. Thumbs up emoji. Johnson's replied, only in snakes and ladders, winking face. He'll be coming up behind her if she's not careful. And he has. He's come up right behind her. He's thrown a 3, which takes him to square 9. Caroline's looking a bit uncomfortable, and who can blame her? Caroline's turn. Let's see if she can get away from him. She has. She's thrown a 6. That takes her to 16. She's rolled again and got a 3, putting her on square 19. Eat my dust, she's messaged. That might be a bit premature, and that's Johnson's department. Johnson's go again. He's thrown a 6. That takes him to 15. He's rolled again and got a 5, goes to number 20. He's leapfrogged her. Speaking of which, apparently that was Johnson's favourite game at school. He'd have the whole year lined up with their hands on their knees and their heads bowed while he ran at them from behind. He said it would be good practice for when he was Prime Minister and they were in his cabinet. He was right. Oh, he sent a message. I'm one in front. And Caroline messages straight back, only with the slimmest of majorities. She's got a point. We'll end part 1 there, because there's lots more to get through on this week's show. Caroline's on square 19 and Johnson's on number 20, so it's all to play for in next week's Boardman's Board Game Boredom Buster, only on the Stuck at Home service.
Damn, two-parter. So let's wait till next week to find out who wins the game of Snakes and Ladders.
I personally am thrilled to find out. So, what do you think after this one?
Well, with haircuts and Snakes and Ladders, we've really ramped up the excitement. So I suggest we have our local curate giving us a thought for the day.
Good morning, Martin, and good morning, everyone. A little post-Easter reflection as your thought for the day. Sometimes when we say something, people hear something completely different. One of the people I really look up to was the late Bishop of Durham, David Jenkins. He once tried explaining some quite complex theology on television. He ended up in a complete media storm. His explanation when it all died down was thus. He said, it's not what you say, it's what people hear. One of my favourite examples of this was when I first moved to Pittsmore to teach at a school just down the hill, a school called Ellesmere. It's since been demolished by the council. When I started there, the kids were doing their best to demolish it themselves. At the time, it was going through a really turbulent time. Some of you may recall the Sheffield Star dubbing them the Terror Tots. That didn't help. But a few of us started at the same time, including a new head teacher who was clearing her vision that we needed to get things back to normal, including a regular calendar of cultural events like Easter. She decided that we have to do something to mark Easter. She was a great head, Pat Jackson she was called, something to mark Easter other than just chocolate. I still remember the day she walked into my classroom and sat us all down to share her idea. We're going to have a traditional parade of Easter bonnets, she said. 2 kids sniggered. A few laughed out loud. Some looked outraged. I remember a couple looking just embarrassed. One looked just a bit troubled. This was a really surprising response. And then I noticed a lad called Craig. He still lives locally. Grown up now, still lives locally. Craig making a hand gesture that explained it all to me. Bonnets? They thought she'd said bollocks. A traditional parade of Easter bollocks. And I didn't know how to stop her, how to get this across to her before she said, and if you'll forgive me, I'll say it as they heard it, we can decorate these bollocks with tissue flowers. You can staple and sellotape whatever you want to onto your own bollocks. And little yellow chickens, you can stick a few of them on if you want to. She was on a roll. I couldn't stop her. The whole thing culminated with, as they heard it, and then we'll parade our bollocks in front of the whole school. So that's your thought for the day. Not as profound as Radio 4, but shorter, and it was all bonnets.
So what do you want me to do next?
Do the weather, I suppose.
Yeah. Weather's really irritatingly nice nowadays, isn't it?
It is. I can't think of anything new to say about the weather, really.
There's not even any bloody clouds to talk about.
No.
It's just...
Oh, there's one over there.
It's just big and blue with the sun, and it's all warm and lovely. Oh.
Yeah.
Can't stand it.
Well, the weather virtually writes itself, really.
You haven't got much time for it to change. Have you seen the time? Have you seen what the date is talking about? We always record these segments like a week in advance. It's like Tuesday now.
Yeah.
Are you sure about that? Yeah.
I think it's Friday, isn't it?
It might be Thursday. Oh, let me check my phone.
Yeah.
Oh God, it's Sunday.
Sunday? No, that's the day we've got to put the show out.
No, Martin, seriously, it's Sunday. The show needs to go out in 10 minutes.
That's not possible. I haven't edited the long conversation between Joanne and Kate yet.
What's the conversation about?
The fact they've both got adult disabled children.
Martin, we've got no time to dilly-dally. Get in the editing booth now.
Is it really Sunday?
We're radio professionals.
Yeah. Hang on, okay.
You don't need to finish it. Just export it now. Just export it and put it in the show.
Okay, it's ready. I'm going to play it now.
Ryan is now 25.
Right.
And he has got something called optic nerve hyperplasia, which is the underdevelopment of the optic nerve, which kind of suggests that he's visually impaired, which he is.
Yeah.
But also there are additional things. That part of the brain is very close to other areas that enable us to, balance, coordinate, and various hormone things as well. But also, I mean, I suppose the biggest thing with Ryan, the biggest challenge that didn't come out till later was really his learning disability. So I mean, like Ryan is such that I suppose in his head he's more like a 6-year-old in a way. I mean, he can't read at all, for example. He can't brush his own teeth. There's a lot of help that we have to give him.
Can he organise himself and things? Is it
no?
No, that's like my daughter.
Yes. I mean, basically, every decision is made by me and his stepdad. He accesses tons. Oh, I hate that word, access. It's such a social care word, isn't it? It goes to loads of places. With money that they give us from social care, he accesses lots of services with the budget from social care. I hate their language. But anyway, you tell me about your situation. I've got about mine.
I've got a daughter. Well, I've got 2 children, but my daughter is Stella, and she's 21. She turned 21 in the coronavirus period.
Right.
So, thankfully, because she's autistic and learning disabled, we hadn't got a big 500 place party planned at Baldwin's Amiga or whatever. So we had a cake, and that shows how to touch on. Baldwin's Amiga's been shut for about 2 years, but yeah, that's what people do, isn't it? For the 21st, they have these big fancy parties. They go around town. Yeah. We stayed
in
at home.
A limousine,
Oh god, with a fake tan. No, I won't go there.
So we ain't got any of that with her.
No,
Stella.
thank goodness we don't have that. No.
Yeah.
So we baked a cake and we blew the candles out about 3 times. That was the excitement we had. Yeah. And the smoke comes up from the candles and we all flap. It's really good.
Oh, right. Birthday parties are a bit funny, aren't they, sometimes? Because we're still doing that. I mean, like Ryan at 25, we're still, he has certain, obsessions. I won't call it that. I'll call it interests, right?
Special interest.
Special interest. So at the moment, he's into spiders and worms and stuff like that. So, I mean, his last birthday cake was a snail.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and we're still like, it's a smiley cartoon type snail, he means, you know what I mean? So he's still kind of like, he is 6 in his head. So 25 years on, we are still reading, equivalent to like Harry Potter stories kind of thing at night time and those kind of things. So, being parenting, it becomes so long because, you've been doing this.
One of the things I say when I meet other parents of children with disabilities, who are in the younger age group, I say, just be careful what videos or DVDs you give them as the first DVDs, because you'll be watching those for the rest of your life.
Absolutely. I know. Well, yeah, we're still on Thomas the Tank and, James the Red Engine, and we're still talking about, the book.
Williams Wish Wellingtons, Simon Sam.
Really?
All sorts of really obscure stuff.
Yeah, and Ryan has part of his condition, actually, because I've met other parents with the same thing, part of his, they always have in common a remarkable memory for things that have happened a long time ago. So I mean, he will remember in detail something that happened when, you know, in 1997 or something, you know, which was total. And he remember lots of things. And when he says something, I always think, I bet you're right. I know you're right, but you know, I can't remember it. You know, he has got a remarkable memory.
We don't get that call back from Stella because the communication's not that good. Stella's autistic.
Yes.
She's classic.
Yes, Ryan is as well. But
yes, classic or Canna's autistic. Yes.
Classic what autistic?
Classic or Canna autistic.
Oh, right, I've never heard of that.
It's pretty. Yeah, it's obviously there's a lot of contention about terms. Probably low functioning would be the best.
Yeah.
Or high support needs is the more acceptable term.
Right.
And she's also got a pretty severe learning disability as well with it. And for a long time I've tried to say which is the one that's pushing her needs. Is it the learning disability? Is it the autism? And people would say, well, it's really difficult to separate the two. She reads the books and she has great time. So she's upstairs reading The Very Hungry Caterpillar, Harry McClary, The Tiger Who Came to Tea.
So it's that kind of level, isn't it? Can I just ask you, you know, when she reads, because I've got this theory about teaching Ryan to read, because he loves books and he loves being read to and he loves characters.
Phonics doesn't work.
I was going to ask you, that is exactly what I was going to ask you. Phonics doesn't work, I know. Memory. I think flashcards for him. I think let's choose the most...
and chunks.
Yes.
That's the way I describe it.
I remember I went to Ryan's school. Right, the school was great. It was wonderful. I'm not saying it was great as if it wasn't, but it actually was a really great school. But I remember at one of these reviews, you know, you go to billions of them, don't you? Yeah. But I remember at one of these, I said, I've got a theory about Ryan's reading. I think he can't learn by phonics. I think he can only learn by like the good old-fashioned 1950s way when they'd flashcards in front of you and say, this says this says this.
Remembering
and, you know,
the whole word, like a photograph.
Absolutely. Yeah, like the shape of the word. So, you know, like Dr. Huws books, they used 50 words, didn't they? All of the Dr. Huws books, they used the same 50 words. And then I want you to teach him 50 words, and then he will have access, I'm using that word again, he will be able to read lots of books that have got only 50 words in, and that would open up a whole world to him. And they kind of didn't do it. So I've still got this in mind 10 years later.
Phonics doesn't work.
Yeah, phonics is rubbish for somebody like them, isn't it? I suppose.
I think, I'm sure she hasn't learnt by phonics at all. Phonics doesn't work.
So she's learned by the shape of the word?
Yeah, or just the context. And in some cases, these books that she's very familiar with, she's just memorised the whole book.
Yes,
I'm fairly sure of that. Because you've already said the memories are really, that's one of their sort of strong points. Yeah. So they don't need to learn by phonics. I mean, you know, you can go, so k, at, k, and she'll go k, and won't go any further.
Yes.
You can't blend the words.
No, that's it.
So she loves the she loves the reading, and she's really happy with that. And she's brilliant at colouring by numbers as well. Colouring by numbers.
Oh wow!
Gives her independence.
Yes.
She can't. If you give her a colouring book that's got nothing in it, she hasn't got the imagination or the planning skills to be able to do the colours. But if they've got numbers and she can read them, if there's a
that's a good idea. I might do that with Ryan because
colouring by numbers is brilliant. Buster's colouring books on Amazon, absolutely fantastic.
Wow.
We buy them by the dozen. And we go through the same. We have the same 2 books, and she's been doing them for 18 months. And they have a code at the bottom. 1 is red, 2 is light green, 3 is dark green. That. Brilliant.
Right,
and it gives them independence.
Yes.
I can't.
Yeah, sometimes it's just keying into something, isn't it? And you know, as soon as you key into it, it's like, it opens up the whole. But you just don't know what it's going to be, and often you just find it by accident, don't you? That they really love something, you know.
And being able for them to do the whole task themselves, rather than you having to be handing them crayons or say, colour this bit red, colour this bit blue. So if you can recognise enough words. You could even go over it. You could even colour the red with a red crayon or something.
So it's just a key, isn't it? Yeah. You really have to learn the rules, and that
and you have
takes
to
a lot.
Advocate for your child. You have to know what your young person wants. You will always, the parent will. In our cases, we will know more than the experts about what our child needs, I would suggest.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that what happens is, I think as parents, you often rely on a kind of an instinct. It is a kind of, I wish there was a better word for instinct, because that
Learned
almost sounds
experience.
like, learned experience. But you put that in. You almost don't have to think about things. You don't have to analyse why it works in advance or anything like that. You just kind of do it, and that you learn that as a parent of any child. You learn it.
You do.
And
if you go against it,
yeah.
and things go wrong, you think, why was this so stupid? Why didn't I follow my instinct?
Absolutely.
How
and
often
the problem
that?
is with social care is that they do not do that. What they do, they rely on their policies and, and all of those kind of things to kind of make things happen. And that, I think, goes against the grain, because I don't think they work hand in hand very well.
We have a lot of problems with social care, some of which I can't really go into in public. And I'm the one, they say to me, have you got these papers? And I'm the one that's supplying them with the papers. And in a way, like all the way through our children's lives, we are the project manager. We're in the middle of a big web of all these different people that input into our children's lives. Yeah. And we coordinate the whole lot.
That is like one of my biggest worries, really, is what is going to happen to Ryan when I die. It's awful thought. I kind of feel, I know that it's probably not the right time to try and sort something out, because I know that things change so much. So and he still lives at home at 25. That will obviously have to stop one day, but at the moment I'm just kind of thinking this works for now, so I don't know. And it's worrying. It's really worrying.
We're in the same position. Stella's at home. We're trying to get some respite, partly to give us a break, but partly overnight respite, but partly so that it gets her used to being dealt with by other people.
Yeah.
It sounds brutal, but statistically, young people with disabilities die at a much earlier age than the rest of us. And if I cross my fingers, she might go before me, so we won't have to worry about it. People think that's a bit brutal, but it's sort of factual.
Yeah, the thought of handing him over to them makes me, I just can't bear it.
Don't go there.
It's kind of nice having Ryan around. He kind of like, he's a bit of a pinnacle sometimes, he kind of, he in some ways he holds us together quite a bit. Because you're always, you're often kind of referring to him and his needs. I think that, the situation between the two siblings can, it's not, I know that Ruby has said that she sometimes wishes that she had a normal older brother.
We're all quite happy. And one of the things that I've always said is that we've never had the squabbling between the children that when you have two neurotypical children that happens, and her brother is so good with her, and there doesn't seem to be any, there's no tension at all between them. There's one thing about my daughter, about Stella, is that there's absolutely no malice about it. There's no sort of jealousy. There's none of the the negative things that normal people have.
Yeah.
She doesn't have that. She's just I describe as being very pure.
Yeah.
She lives in the moment for the senses.
And Ryan does very much, actually. He hasn't got kind of a malicious bone in his body either, really. He's kind of like, he does as well, just live in the moment. So that's really lovely to see. I don't know what it would have been like had it not been that, because this is the family that we've got.
This is the
Stuck At
Home Service.
Right, we need a new item. You say May's done a recording for
Yeah,
us.
May did a story for us. I'll take the spare recorder and go and get the recording right now.
Go.
All right, I'm going.
Go on, away. Run like the wind.
Are you sure Frank needs to go? I've got the email right here.
Oh, what's on the email?
The file. The recording.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, that'll save a while, won't it? Yeah, okay.
Winter's Work by M.J.M. Norwood. Under the earth, cushioned by the dark, Winter waited. She spent the time spinning snowflakes and keeping away summer, whose warmth would destroy her careful work. Between her fingers, sparkling shapes took life, each unique, and only a few of which would ever be appreciated by eyes other than Winter's own. A sudden gust of damp air and a spray of ochre leaves across Winter's growing drifts heralded the arrival of autumn. Winter finished the snowflake she was working on, then turned to face her sister. Autumn looked tired. Her bark-like skin was patched with lichen, and only a few leaves still clung to the branches that sprouted from her back. "My turn?" said Winter. "Your turn," Autumn replied. "I am finished with the world for this year." Winter laughed, a sound like tinkling icicles. "Good. There is much I have to do." In a city that could have been any one of a dozen lookalikes, Winter let loose her flurries. Gentle flakes drifted past her as she regarded her work, settling on the ground in a translucent layer of white that would soon thicken to a cold blanket. It was night, and the streetlights illuminated the snowfall in sparkling relief. She was so absorbed in watching this that she barely noticed another figure appearing beside her. "Why do you send the snow from above?" said Spring. "It just smothers everything." Despite coming from the same ageless eternity as all her sisters, Spring seemed to have a youthful quality about her, a certain tone of voice and carriage of her head that Winter found both exasperating and endearing. Before answering, Winter looked down and saw fresh green shoots sprouting around her sister's feet. Of course she would see snow as smothering when her work began in the ground and grew up. "Do you not think it is beautiful?" she said, looking back at the snow slowly covering the rooftops in front of them. "It is clean and crisp, and I put so much effort into it." She caught a falling flake between thumb and forefinger. Its fractals glittered in the moonlight as she held it out for Spring to see, but one breath from her sister was enough to melt it instantly. Spring pursed her bud-like lips. "I suppose it is pretty, but I would give it more colour." "I know you would," Winter replied, looking at the vibrant blossom flowering across her sister's shoulders. She sighed. Of course Spring wouldn't understand. She couldn't understand. "I should go," said Spring. "It's getting too cold for me. Goodbye, Winter." She vanished, and the shoot she left behind froze, withered, and died. Winter moved further north and began to employ the harsher elements of her craft, knife-like winds, battering snowstorms, relentless ice. Bitter Winter, she was called, and she accepted the title. With a flick of her wrist, she started an avalanche that crushed a mother bear and her cubs in their den, and before the wreckage had even settled, Summer appeared beside her, staying suspended in the air so as not to start the ice melting. "Should you not be in the south of the world?" Winter asked. "It is your time there." Rays of sunlight glittered across the white landscape as Summer waved a hand dismissively. "I've set everything in motion. I will not be missed for a few moments." She paused and looked at the churned-up remainder of the avalanche. "Why do that? Those deaths were entirely unnecessary." "It is part of the work. I do it, however much I may dislike it," Winter replied. "Besides, can you really say you do not do the same?" Summer tossed her head. "I would never be so cold and callous about it." "I would disagree," said Winter icily. With a snap of her fingers, they were in a new location, underwater. Before them lay a wide expanse of coral, or what had once been coral. Now it was a desolate field of nothing, off-white like bones bleached in the sun. "It was warmth that did this," said Winter. "Your domain, sister, not mine. Warmth killed the coral, and in turn all the little creatures that lived in it. Is that not callous?" Summer didn't look at her. "It's not the same at all." "It is. We both kill, each in our own ways, and each just as mercilessly. But what you have done, what I have done, is past," Winter shouted with all the frigid fury she could muster. "Your reign is coming. The humans have made sure of it, and I am sure it will be more destructive and more violent than any of my ice ages." Summer made no answer, disappearing in a cloud of fiery anger that was only natural for her, and the water where she had been boiled. Winter sighed and cooled it with a touch, then returned to her work. She found herself in a park and set to creating a gentle scene, laying a soft blanket of snow on the ground, edging the tree branches with frost and dragging her fingers across spider webs to form delicate, lacy patterns of ice. "Does it not infuriate you that all this work will be undone in a matter of hours?" said Autumn, appearing at her side. "I thought you were finished with the world for this year," said Winter dryly. Autumn shrugged, sending warmly coloured leaves fluttering down around her. "I am somewhat rejuvenated. Perhaps I spoke too hastily." Winter regarded Autumn. It was true, her sister looked far better than when she had last seen her. The branches on her back were full again, her bark fresh and clear. Eyes like two acorns gleamed out at the world. "Will you not answer my question?" Autumn said. "I know it infuriates me, knowing my beautiful leaves will get trampled into sludge after they fall, that the harvest will be stored away in boxes and not admired as it rightly should." Winter considered before answering. "No, it does not anger me. Impermanence is part of the work. How else can we take our turns with the world?" Autumn bent and gathered up a handful of snow, letting it fall through her fingers to be carried away by the wind. "But they will come, the humans, with their sledges and their boots, and churn your snow to mud. They will have their fun, and you will have to do your work all over again." "Do you still not understand?" said Winter, watching the first child crest the hill, an out-of-breath parent in tow. The pink-coated little figure jumped on a sledge, and the parent gave a shove that sent the child hurtling down the hill with a cry of delight, carving a meandering furrow through the white. Winter gave a small smile. "That is the point."
Okay, that's it. Now we need English. We've got it.
I got the recording. Here you go.
It's okay. We've already got it. What I could do with you is you're running down to Ingrid's place to pick up her.
Ingrid's?
Yeah, on the news from nowhere. Yeah.
Just know the news from bloody far away is where it is.
Go on, get on with it. We're doing well. We're doing well. Good lad.
You did it again.
Yeah, what?
She sent the email.
Oh, really?
Yeah, look.
Yeah, we're a bit slow on the uptake this week, aren't we?
If any of you would like to hear more of News from Nowhere out loud, a group of us are reading it chapter by chapter on Zoom in 45-minute sessions every Monday night. So do contact Martin, who can contact me, and I can send an email invitation to anyone who'd like to come and listen. Everyone is welcome, and you're welcome to come and give it a try, see if you like it, drop in, drop out. All of those things would be fine. For the moment, though, back to the story. So our hero Guest, you remember, has gone to bed in 1890 and woken up in a transformed future London, which seems to be a combination of a kind of medieval, unmechanised past and a hopeful post-capitalist future, where people live in harmony with each other and the land, where accommodation is shared between people, where relationships are freely chosen and unconstrained, and where social organisation means there's no poverty and work equals pleasure. Guest in this section then continues on his journey back into the past, or the past of that future, which is in fact his time, through conversation with old Hammond, and he's catching up with the way in which that world has changed from the 19th century. Old Hammond, you remember, is the antiquarian, the great-grandfather of Dick, Guest's first guide. Old Hammond lives in the British Museum and talks Guest through all of the story of that new world. And thereafter, Guest sets off on a journey up the Thames to Oxfordshire, ending at a thinly disguised version of what is in fact obviously William Morris's own Oxfordshire home, Kelmscott House, and that's evident from the trajectory of the journey and the way in which the house is described. So Morris once said that the only reasonable way of reading a utopia is as an expression of the temperament of its author. And we might see in this text, with all of its focus on beauty and harmony and nature, but also that continual presence of the possibility for dissent and imperfection, something of Morris's own personality. And certainly the scenes in which the text takes place are the scenes that are very, very familiar to him in that kind of southern part of England between London and Oxford. In conversation with old Hammond, then, Guest learns about the key points of this utopian future, and remembering that utopia means nowhere, although there's also a different kind of version. Utopia, or utopia in Greek, so I'm told, means nowhere, but utopia with an EU also means a good place. So utopia combines both of those ideas of no place, but also a good place. It's not, however, as we often take it to mean nowadays, a kind of impossible dream of some kind of naive idea of perfection. It's more a critique of its own day through an imagination of the future. So, key points of the world in which Guest has arrived, narrated by Old Hammond. First of all, London's slums have been pulled down in a great clearing of misery, as it's known, and it's celebrated every year on May Day. People from the slums moved into houses in the business part of town, which had been vacated. That part of town had come to be known as the swindling kens, and those houses were no longer needed for business in the renewed egalitarian economy of nowhere, in which people work at tasks that suit them and share in the benefits. And you remember in the last section, we looked at the way in which people are working in banded workshops, sharing communally in handcraft work that they like rather than working in factories. So Old Hammond says this to Guest about the way that things have changed. And he's talking to Guest about the 19th century under the kind of conceit that he doesn't realise that Guest himself is from the 19th century. So it's a way of Morris kind of giving some exposition about what he thinks is wrong with the 19th century for his audience. Old Hammond said, as to the big murky places which were once, as we know, the centres of manufacture, they have, like the brick and mortar desert of London, disappeared. Only since they were the centres of nothing but manufacture and served no purpose but that of the gambling market, they've left less signs of their existence than London. So he's talking now as well about the manufacturing districts of the north. And we're told later in the text, for instance, that Manchester has disappeared altogether. Sheffield doesn't get a mention, but we can imagine the same. Of course, the great change in the use of mechanical force made this an easy matter, and some approach to their breakup as centres would probably have taken place even if we hadn't changed our habits so much. But being such as they were, no sacrifice would have seemed too great a price to pay for getting rid of the manufacturing districts, as they were called. And it's worth noting here as well that later in the text, when Guest is going up the river, he sees a boat that's being, or a number of boats that are being driven forward by some kind of force, and he notes that he could see it's not the usual mechanical force, but he thinks he won't bother to ask how these boats are functioning because he probably wouldn't understand anyway. And that's a useful device for allowing Morris not to have to think about quite what it is that's going to have replaced mechanical force, and we as readers don't have to think about it either because Guest sort of brushes that off. So mechanical force has been replaced, but we're not quite sure by what. For the rest, whatever coal or mineral we need, Hammond goes on, is brought to grass and sent whither it is needed with as little as possible of dirt, confusion and the distressing of quiet people's lives. One is tempted to believe from what one has read of the condition of those districts in the 19th century that those who had them under their power worried, befouled and degraded men out of malice prepense. But it wasn't so. Like the miseducation of which we were talking just now, it came of their dreadful poverty. They were obliged to put up with everything and even pretend they liked it, whereas we can now deal with things reasonably and refuse to be saddled with what we do not want. The countryside and the city, after this sort of change in work patterns, have merged. The townsfolk have invaded the country, Old Hammond tells Guest, and just like the invaders of old, and he's talking about those who've come to the shores of Britain in the pre-medieval times, they yielded to the influence of their surroundings and became country people. So town and country are now connected to each other, and the beauty and plenitude of the land exists in both of them. Old Hammond explains that England is now a garden where nothing is wasted and nothing is spoilt. And to some of you, this might sound like a kind of forerunner of the Garden City movement, which was pioneered by people like Raymond Unwin and Ebenezer Howard. They're often touted as people who are working in the spirit of William Morris, but I think in fact the kinds of organisation and structures of garden cities are not very much in keeping with the spirit of William Morris. And although people like Unwin and Howard read Morris and were familiar with him, I think they were more influenced by other 19th century writers, including the American state socialist novelist Edward Bellamy, of whose novel of state socialism, Looking Backward, in which everyone is allocated jobs for life and given places to live and told to eat in communal halls, Morris allegedly wrote that if anyone brigaded him into a regiment of workers like that, he'd lie on his back and kick. So Morris is always interested in the capacity for people to do their own pleasurable work, to make their own decisions, although in a society in which there's community and equality. He's always interested in the seeds of disorder within order and the creative potential of dissent. The Garden City movement, I think, is much more interested in a kind of amelioration of society and a kind of turning aside from class divisions, which is not of interest to Morris, whose vision was absolutely revolutionary. So old Hammond goes on to tell Guest about the ways in which work and government have changed, and then he outlines the process of revolution by which the old society was swept away completely and a new one born out of its ashes. And when we think about this new society, it's worth noting that another thing that Morris wrote about Edward Bellamy's Looking Backward, which he reviewed just before he wrote his own News from Nowhere, is that the author wasn't able to conceive of anything else than, as Morris puts it, the machinery of society. Morris is opposed to a kind of machine society, which suggests a kind of perfection, cogs, wheels, people doing what they're told. In Morris's world, there is no central organising force. You remember the Houses of Parliament have become a dung market. There's no kind of central government, and decisions are made by meetings in the moat houses by local communities. There are also no prisons, and there's little crime. We discussed this a little bit last time, which arises in part, the absence of crime, old Hammond suggests, from that crime itself, old Hammond suggests, arises from the laws of private property, which forbade the satisfaction of their natural desires to all but the privileged few. And because private property has been abolished, a large portion of the need for crime is abolished. People have grown, he says, into a habit of good fellowship with each other. But as always, this isn't the whole story. You don't mean to tell me, Guest says, that no one ever transgresses this habit of good fellowship? Certainly not, said old Hammond. But when the transgressions occur, everybody, transgressors and all, know them for what they are. The errors of friends, not the habitual actions of persons driven into enmity against society. I mentioned before this idea of imperfection, but it's accommodated here then in the wider fellowship of the people. And the thrust of this book, it's worth noting, is not necessarily to give a great deal of detail about the ways in which this habit of fellowship is organised, although there is quite an account of it a little bit later on. But the purpose of the text, perhaps primarily, as the academic E.P. Thompson said, drawing on the work of someone else called Miguel Abensor, is the education of desire. So the point then is not so much about the details, and there are some of those, but about feeling, about the possibility of Morris signalling to his own Victorian audience caught in the throes of desperate poverty and class inequality, to raise for them the possibility of living differently. What this world is not concerned with is kind of jostling for position and power. So chapter 13, concerning politics, goes like this, and I will read the whole chapter, which is the work of a very short moment. Here's chapter 13. Said I, how do you manage with politics? Said Hammond, smiling, I'm glad it is of me that you ask that question. I do believe that anybody else would make you explain yourself or try to do so till you were sick of asking questions. Indeed, I believe I'm the only man in England who would know what you mean. I'm going to interject there. You remember that old Hammond is an antiquarian, so he's interested in the past. And we've already been told that history isn't of that much interest to most people in Nowhere. So a lot of people would know nothing about the 19th century and the kind of significance of politics that went on there. So old Hammond continues, and since I know, I will answer your question briefly by saying that we're very well off as to politics, because we have none. If ever you make a book out of this conversation, put this in a chapter by itself, after the model of old Horribus' Snakes in Iceland, of which, of course, there are none. I will, said I. And that's the end of the chapter on politics. So this is not to say that there is no detail. The book outlines the way in which social management, as it's called, rather than politics, is conducted consensually. And it goes on to give a really detailed critical analysis of Victorian working practices, factory labour, colonialism, and the way in which the production of things and the selling of things drives colonialism. It damns the overproduction of what Morris calls shoddy wares, in an account that some people might think still resonates today. So I'm just going to read a little bit of what Old Hammond says about the working practices of the 19th century and how those have changed in Nowhere. It is clear from all we hear and read that in the last age of civilization, and interestingly for Morris, civilization is always a kind of damning term, men had got into a vicious circle in the matter of production of wares. They had reached a wonderful facility of production, and in order to make the most of that facility, they had gradually created, or allowed to grow rather, a most elaborate system of buying and selling, which has been called the world market. And that world market, once set a-going, forced them to go on making more and more of these wares, whether they needed them or not. So that while, of course, they could not free themselves from the toil of making real necessities, they created in a never-ending series sham or artificial necessaries, which became, under the iron rule of the aforesaid world market, of equal importance to them with the real necessaries which supported life. By all this, they burdened themselves with a prodigious mass of work, merely for the sake of keeping their wretched system going. Yes, and then, said I. It's a lovely moment where we're made aware of the fact that this is all very familiar to Guest. Why then, once they had forced themselves to stagger along under this horrible burden of unnecessary production, it became impossible for them to look upon labour and its results from any other point of view than one, to wit, the ceaseless endeavour to expend the least possible amount of labour on any article made, and yet at the same time to make as many articles as possible. To this cheapening of production, as it was called, everything was sacrificed, the happiness of the workman at his work, nay, his most elementary comfort and bare health, his food, his clothes, his dwelling, his leisure, his amusement, his education, his life, in short, did not weigh a grain of sand in the balance against this dire necessity of cheap production of things, a great part of which were not worth producing at all.
Okay, I got the recording from again.
Yeah, well, it's a really big recording, isn't it?
It's huge, it's really
I'm
heavy.
surprised it fits on an email.
Oh, this is me. Let's put it down over here.
Okay. Whew. Well, that's it, job done. Well done to Robin.
That's the show.
Not quite yet. Don't you need to pick a national anthem?
Oh yeah.
That's easy, we'll do that in the end.
I'll put it at the front of the programme somewhere, I'll just drag it out.
You know what, guys, I think we did a really good job this week.
Good running by you.
Thank you very much. Great speed editing from you, Robin, keeping us on track. You know what? I think we can keep it this late next week as well. We can clearly get it done.
Yeah. You're not too tired or anything?
Oh no, I could keep this going for days.
Okay.
Fortunately, I have 7 days until we need to do this again.
Yeah. We can relax now. Here's the national anthem.
We do not know what lies ahead, but our times they're coming, and if we believe all that's been said, it's a kind of unraveling. The ground beneath our feet is shaking, and with each day's news our hearts are aching. So put your hand in mine, my friend, we'll face what comes together. We'll face what comes together. So let us stand as we face the coming storm, for we love this land.